Hi, everybody. If you don't know me, I'm Linwood Pendleton. I am a new resident of the Duke Marine Lab, and I started here in September, moved to Beaufort in October. I'm Director of Ocean and Coastal Policy for the Nicholas Institute. And today, I've invited a friend of mine, Mark Gold, Dr. Mark Gold, to come and talk to you guys. I've known Mark for about 14 years now, since I started as an assistant professor at the University of Southern California. And I built my whole academic career around trying to figure out how people respond to changes in the environment. And as someone who likes to surf and swim at the beach, I've always been interested in water quality. But the thing about water quality is, first thing people always say is, well, who really knows what the water quality is anyhow? And then, what do they know about it even if they know what the water quality is? Well, in Southern California, people know what water quality is because the group that Mark runs, Heal the Bay, created these things called Heal the Bay grades, which are algorithms that take complicated information on fecal indicator bacteria, Enterococcus, total coliforms, and they look at geometric means and take all this complicated scientific data and distill it into grades that people can understand. And what we found when we've done studies, big studies of lots of beaches in LA and Orange County, is that one of the most important determinants of where people choose to go to the beach is the average annual Heal the Bay grade. So this is something Heal the Bay has done for a long time, is communicate science to people. But Mark's taken it well beyond that. Mark has a doctorate from a program I taught in at UCLA. Went from USC to the dark side at UCLA, depending on where you start. And it's one of the few remaining professional doctoral programs out there. And Mark went directly from that program where he looked at the epidemiology of beach water quality, among other things, and went to work at Heal the Bay and has been applying that kind of science to policy making in Southern California, but it's spread virally. Heal the Bay grades are everywhere now. And it really is becoming a currency that people use to try to figure out where to go to the beach, when to go to the beach, and what to do when you get to the beach. Mark has started blogging, and I consider myself a pretty technically advanced kind of guy. I have wireless on my boat, and I ordered an iPad yesterday. But I haven't really been very drawn up into environmental blogs generally, because they haven't been able to hold my attention. But Mark's got a blog called Spouting Off that really does hold my attention, and partly it's the way he delivers information. So what I asked Mark to do is come out and talk to us, not about science, not about what it's like to run a nonprofit organization in a big city, but to talk about using different kinds of media, whether it's public service announcements or blogs or whatever it is, to try to get people well informed about the science of the environment around them. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Mark, and he'll give his presentation, and you want to hold questions till the end?
Sure, that sounds good. Linwood is definitely taking me a little bit out of my comfort zone and not the normal talk that I often would give on coastal pollution and marine conservation issues and how to make a difference and some of the regulatory policies that are going on in California and comparing and contrasting to what's occurring nationally. That's the typical talk that I would give, but in this particular circumstance, it did make us think, both myself and some staff, about what we do at Heal the Bay and what works and what doesn't. And you got to remember, put it in the context of where we are, right? So we're in Los Angeles, right? And so there's a lot of resources in Los Angeles in the media that maybe aren't everywhere under the sun. So you'll see a couple of public service announcements that we have pretty much every major advertising agency that you can think of has some sort of office in Los Angeles. Also, we have Hollywood. So we have the entertainment industry, so you'll see some people you might recognize. And in some of the public service announcements that we've been able to get put together. One of the things I do want to emphasize in that working with these folks is they do it for free. And I have a brother who's a creative director at an ad agency, and they do it for free because that's how they win their awards, that's how they get their next client, that sort of thing. So if you're looking at one of these really expensive looking public service announcements going, how can a group afford that? that's how these ad agencies end up doing this stuff for free. So our group, we're about 25 years old. This is actually our 25th anniversary this year. I was the first hire there. I've been there for 22 years. So one of these days I'll get a job. And we now have a staff of 50 people, including a small aquarium. So we've grown quite a bit during that time and done a lot of stuff in the area. But let's focus on the communication side. All right. So there've been some big wins over the years in the 25 years. This is the Hyperion Sewage Treatment Plant. We don't do things small where we are. This is has a capacity of 450 million gallons per day. Treats about 370 million gallons a day of sewage from 4 million people, and treats it to full secondary levels. When we first were founded as an organization back in 1985, these guys did partial secondary. We had sewage spills all the time, beach closures in the middle of summer, and sewage spills would be in the millions of gallons. And so what ended up happening around the organization's formation was the EPA finally decided to not grant a waiver from the full secondary treatment requirements of the Clean Water Act, Section 301H of the Clean Water Act. And so the city of Los Angeles had to spend about $4 billion, that's with a B, billion dollars, to upgrade the sewage treatment plant as well as the sewer system within Los Angeles. And now it's a really good sewage treatment plant, and we actually have a nearby water reclamation facility that treats it all the way to potable levels and uses it for a wide variety of different uses. Amundsen Ranch, just another example, is about a 2,900 acre parcel at the headwaters of the Malibu Creek watershed. We'll get more into that in a minute on the campaign side, and the beach report card, which you already heard from Linwood, and so we'll get into that as well. So, putting a media campaign together, you have to look at what's your end goal. What are you actually trying to achieve with that campaign? What do you want the public to do? Do you just want it to be an awareness campaign, or do you actually want some action? There's a big difference between those two. So if you're just going for awareness, it's actually 100 times easier than if you're trying to end up with some sort of action on a particular issue. And who are you actually trying to target? I mean, is it a specific audience, for example? Whoever's going to make the decision on a specific issue, or are you going for the general public, or who are you actually trying to target? So those are the sorts of things you need to put together before you put your media campaign together. And again, you got to keep things simple in your messaging and have it target the audience that you really want it to target. And what's the best way to actually reach them? Is it via computer? Is it through direct mail? Is it on the radio? Do you do a mailing campaign? All those various different things. It really depends on what the issue is and how you want to target it. And who can help, because you can't do everything alone. Nobody's got that sort of resources, that level of resources, so you really want to have partnerships on any specific issue and trying to get things done. All right, so the things that you look at as an environmental group and trying to get things done and what your tools are in communications. One is advertising and public service announcements. This is generally better for awareness sorts of issues rather than trying to move people to action. It's not impossible to move people to action. It's a little bit tougher because you really have 30 seconds to get somebody to get what you're trying to say. And that's a pretty limiting medium to get something done, whether it's a radio public service announcement or a TV PSA. That's pretty tough. Press coverage, key thing. You got to be good at working with the media directly. Things have changed dramatically within the last 5 years. The only game in town 5-10 years ago in really trying to get people to move was, the big thing was, did you get an op-ed piece into the newspaper, whether it was the LA Times, New York Times, Sacramento Bee, whatever. And so that's really what you were shooting for. Or could you get a reporter interested in your issue, interested enough to write about the issue before the vote on the issue was going to take place, in the hope that that person's piece would actually have an influence on the decision making. So that's something really critical on the press coverage side. Here you have a picture. This is Frankie on our staff. We created something on the plastic bag issue. So one of the things we're trying to do in California is to ban plastic bags, single-use plastic bags. And we've been trying to do it in a bunch of different ways with local ordinances as well as statewide laws. We've even tried a statewide law with a 25-cent fee to try to get people to bring their own bag. And so one of the things we did, I know, kind of cliched, whatever, but we created Day Without a Bag, which was the last major shopping day before Christmas. And we did this about 2-3 years ago, and it's completely expanded to be almost a statewide phenomenon. And we have partnerships with all the very same stores that are handing out plastic bags the other 364 days a year. And on those days, they'll hand out reusable bags. And so this is a technique where this is like a plastic bag monster where someone was dressed up, and I think it's the 600 plastic bags that we use every year per capita in the state of California to demonstrate the point of what we're doing. This looks really, really cheesy, right? Here's the deal. Everyone covered this. It was like think about the sort of media that you see during the holiday season and how trite every single news program is. And this is the sort of stuff that basically gets eaten up. And so it gets a huge amount of coverage doing that. Next thing is social media. I have to admit, I'm way too old to truly understand how well this is working, but luckily we have people on staff who do Twitter and Facebook, and I have a blog, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I was talking to somebody earlier about this specific thing. Twitter is largely not being used to move people to action. It's just on awareness and developing a relationship with the people. Facebook is a much better way to get people to actually, for example, show up to a hearing and comment. So in the last year, the big community organizing effort has been on marine protected areas. In Southern California, we're moving forward with a network of marine protected areas. And as such, it's been hugely politically controversial. Way more adversarial than it should be. We have the fishing community on one side, you have the environmental community on the other side, you have the scientific community on the side of the environmental community, but not willing to open their mouths. And so that's kind of where things are at. And as a result, this numbers game of who can bring the most people out to a hearing to speak in front of a Fish and Game Commission or a Blue Ribbon Task Force Commission, it's silly, but unfortunately that's the way the game is played. And so social media played a huge role in getting turnout for marine protected area hearings. All right, so the no money advertising strategy. You'll see that my communications director has an odd sense of humor on the sorts of pictures that he throws in there. So it took me a while to understand what each and every one of these things is. So we can play that game. So that's Mad Men, in case you didn't understand. Oops, mine disappeared. Hold on. Whoa.
No, you just...
All right. No, it disappeared on this one.
You just hit the screen.
Hold on. All right, so it's back. All right, so you find a pro bono agency in Los Angeles. It's easy. Like I said, there's probably 10 different agencies that we've worked with at any given time. That's not the norm in most places. So that's a key thing, but it's amazing. If you talk to an ad agency, and the reality is everybody loves the cause of the ocean. Everybody loves the cause of clean water, protecting marine life. It's a pretty easy sell for an ad agency to take you on as a pro bono client. Just realize they're doing this for creativity. So if you're going to start pretending you're a copywriter, it's not going to work. They're going to do their own creative. And that's what it means by let them run with it. Be clever and funny. The world can't end for every single cause. And a lot of people on every environmental cause, everything's way too serious. And that's something that I think is really important. And then ideally, whoever's reading it or watching it or hearing it, that they have something that they can act upon as opposed to you're just entertaining them. All right. So first one up, and at least one of these may be offensive to some people in the room. So keep that in mind, that it's supposed to be provocative as opposed to serious. All right, so this is the one.
Move it! What are you waiting for, soldier? I'm scared, Sarge. We're all scared, son. But, Sarge, some beaches in this area have unusually high levels of fecal coliform in the water. Nothing to be afraid of, soldier. I checked it out on the beach report card. See that?
That's correct.
This water's clean, son. What a relief.
That's good.
All right, so that was for our beach report card. It hardly ran, and the reason why is the PSA. Timing is everything, right? The PSA was finished and ready to go about 3 weeks before we invaded Iraq. And so after that, guess what? I made the executive decision to pull the PSA, and I think it was a really wise thing to do. Now, I think people have enough sensibility they can sort of handle it. But at the time, you can imagine, it was a little too provocative to be on the air. But the point is obvious, is that, it's good to get informed, know before you go, is sort of a theme of the Beach Report card. And so this was probably the best ad that nobody ever saw. And so... Anyway, so that was an interesting circumstance. Let's see the next one. Whoops. All right, so here's another one for the Marine Protected Area campaign. This was a big challenge. You guys, a lot of you guys I know work on these issues. And trying to make marine protected areas something that's really easy for the general public to understand and care about is a really big challenge. You got a 30-second spot. Remember, the medium is really limiting in what you can do. And so again, in this case, we decided to go for beauty. We decided to go for recognizable faces. Probably half of these you won't recognize, because if you do recognize, it means you're watching way too much TV and not studying enough. And the other ones you may get. So this is not controversial at all, but it's more, how do we get the word out that this isn't ending fishing and ending surfing and doing all these things that people accuse MPAs of actually doing that it doesn't do.
MPA, Marine Protected Area. The ocean is one of California's greatest treasures.
MPAs help protect it.
When you protect parts of the ocean, the fish,
The lobster.
Abalone.
they get bigger and more abundant.
MPAs improve fishing.
California is now creating MPAs for one simple reason.
MPAs work.
This is the most significant program ever to protect California's oceans.
Please help us by attending public meetings or sending letters of support. Visit our website at mpaswork.org to find out how you can help.
So more cookbook, standard stuff, because the issue itself was so controversial in its own right, and I mean borderline fistfights, really ugly stuff that was occurring at these public meetings on MPAs. We decided to go the high road in this particular circumstance, and so that's why you see that kind of nice piece. You know, isn't the ocean beautiful? People care about it, that sort of thing. So. And that worked pretty well. All right. It's my favorite.
If someone did this to your neighborhood, you'd want to get even too.
So that was Keeping My Family. My brother wrote that spot when he was at Chiat, and it was pretty cool. It was at the Warner Brothers lot, and so it really caught a lot of people's attention. And that was Chiat went nuts on that. That was probably a $500,000 spot, and they did the whole thing by themselves. So you actually saw special effects and all that crazy stuff like that. It was at a time, it was in the early to mid 90s, and it was a time we're really trying to get the word out on stormwater pollution and what the impacts were of stormwater pollution on marine life. And so this was obviously a simple, fun way to do it that people remember. So that was the Revenge PSA. All right, so this is something that we just did. So this is like hot off the presses on April Fool's Day. We did this campaign. I don't think it got here, unfortunately. It would have been good if it was a nationwide campaign. But I was telling you guys before about the plastic bag stuff that we were doing. And so one of the things that we did, and again, very, very whimsical, and the reason it's whimsical is because what we're having people do on this. So this is a web-based campaign, and it was an April Fool's joke. And so this was done by DDB Advertising. And it's basically trash your friends, not the ocean, is the concept. And so, stopping plastic bags is the principal thing. But we could be doing any single-use plastic packaging insert here. But we started with plastic bags. And so you'll see the call to action. So here was an example. This was Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger's website. And so what you do is you get you get an email from a friend and saying, hey, check this out. This just came out, right? And then it would be, look what I did to your Facebook site, or look what I did to the New York Times site. And so you would click on the link, and then the link would show you the site clean, and then boom, boom, boom. Every plastic bag would start popping up to block the whole site. And just to make you sort of understand, hey, let's stop trashing the ocean and let's get rid of plastic bags. And so it got some coverage, New York Times, Sacramento Bee, a few other sorts of places as, in the April Fool's Day prank thing. Because if we did this any other day of the year, everyone would call us a bunch of hooligans and thugs for, doing some sort of computer terrorism. But you do it on April Fool's Day, and it's totally isn't that funny and cute. And so that was the concept around it, and so we'll continue it for the next month or so. All right, so another thing that we do is an organization and getting the word out is that we work with a lot of different communities. We fix problems, we collaborate, we're science-based. I'm not going to get into too much of detail about who we are, but that's obviously an important way to develop community support. So if you're working on a specific issue within an affected community, then it's great to have community support. So an example is, we've really in the last 6 years done a lot of work in the Compton Creek watershed. And probably most of you guys have never heard of a Compton Creek watershed. It's probably one of the most underserved, poorest communities in all of Los Angeles. And it was a community that really, you can imagine when you're worried about crime and the adequacy of education and all these other, and whether or not you have a hospital within 5 miles of your house. The last thing you're really going to care about is the environment within those communities. And so from that standpoint, really working with the communities to make them understand that Compton Creek, which right now is an urban blight, could indeed become a local resource, a recreational resource for everybody, is a real big challenge. And so we've been involved with a lot of neighborhood cleanups. We do 350 plus beach cleanups and watershed cleanups a year. And that's a really important part of the education story, which is you have to get the word out and not just be some public service announcement on TV, but have a face in the community and work with people in the community and work with leaders in the community so that when various different issues happen within those communities, there's a direct relationship. And so we do a lot of that as well. Coastal Cleanup Day is another example. Last year, our Coastal Cleanup Day within the Los Angeles County area, we had about 70 or so different sites, and we also had this other ad campaign. It was a print campaign. We're all lifeguards, just to get everybody interested in that. And so you had these outdoor billboards all over the place. And the other thing that we have is we have a very strong working relationship with one of the local networks, KCBS and KCAL, and they do a 1-hour TV special a week before every time we do Coastal Cleanup Day, and it educates people on watershed protection issues, marine debris issues, pollution prevention issues, and those sorts of things. That's another way. So we're hitting people on this volunteer day in about 5 different ways in the media. So we're sort of saturating them in that regard. And as a result, we get somewhere around 15,000 volunteers coming out in one day to do cleanups at 60, 70 sites. So it's pretty impressive that number of people come out. So Beach Report Card, you heard me talk a little bit about that before. This is what our beach looks like after rain. This is in Santa Monica. You can see why we need a polystyrene ban. That's not very hard to figure out. What you don't see, obviously, is the fecal bacteria densities after rain go through the roof. And so, yeah, so you see these signs right next to every flowing storm drain or creek in California. They're supposed to be posted. So we helped write a law, Assembly Bill 411, which is the Beach Monitoring and Public Notification Act. of 1997, I think is when we passed the law in the state. And so you see those signs posted. So one of the things that we do is we created this beach report card that Linwood was talking about. We started out in Los Angeles doing an annual report card back in 1990, so this was 20 years ago. And so since then, it has expanded dramatically. But just to give you an idea of what it is, very similar to what Linwood said, so I don't need to go through it in any detail. The credibility, I think, helps a lot. The State Water Resources Control Board and Beach Water Quality Work Group have endorsed it as an effective education tool. EPA also uses it as a tool a lot. What's surprising is it even gets used in the regulatory arena now, which is something that we never counted on doing when we created the report card. So, for example, if a beach gets Fs all the time, it'll be listed on the 303D list of impaired waters for the state of California. So if you know about the Clean Water Act and the 305 water quality assessments, 303D listing, it actually gets used all the time. Like if your beach got an F, then that's a beach that needs to be cleaned up in a TMDL, total maximum daily load needs to be developed for that beach. So now it's the whole state of California. So we grade each and every one of these beaches on an A to F basis every single week. So if there's monitoring that occurs, we develop relationships with all the 20, 30 different monitoring agencies in the state of California, health departments, sewage treatment plants that have monitoring programs as part of their NPDES permits, those sorts of things. And they give us the data by Thursday every week, and then we run it through the algorithm, post it by Friday, and get the grades up there. And so, so we do an annual report card as well, and we have a big press conference right before the Wednesday before Memorial Day. Gets huge statewide coverage. We do the press conference, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego all at the same time. Get about 15 to 20 different cameras that cover it, more than that in the number of newspapers, et cetera, radios, coverage as well. And so it really gets the word out, sort of a tradition now for launching summer in California is that report card. And then we also do an end of summer report card, which is another way that the public sort of sees, well, how did my favorite beach do this last summer, now that we've already been exposed for a whole summer. So we're looking at expanding to Oregon and Washington by this Memorial Day. And what's interesting in working with the state of Oregon is that they monitor beaches like once every 2 weeks. I didn't realize any state was really doing any monitoring that infrequently. There's really no point, to be quite honest. If you're going to be monitoring once every 2 weeks, you may as well not do it at all from the standpoint of protection of public health. You might do it for water quality assessment purposes, but even then it's not very good. But once every 2 weeks, it really has no purpose in public health protection. And then also Washington, and their program is much more refined. And we were requested to, which is weird, you're never requested to do anything by the EPA, but we were requested by the EPA to apply for a grant to expand the report card to the Great Lakes. So we'll find out in June whether or not that expansion is going to occur. But I mean, there's a distinct possibility that the report card may be coming to your state in the next few years. I mean, it seems to have caught on enough that people are saying maybe there should be a national beach report card, because right now the comparability between beach water quality, even county to county, let alone state to state, is really miserable. And something like a report card could really make that sort of difference. And so we're working on that as well. All right, so the benefits to the public is they get the beach water quality information, and so you can click and find out what the report card is in 2 seconds. You can even text it and find that out. We have not done, as my son points out every freaking month, we have not done an iPhone app yet, which we need to do. And so we're going to hopefully work on that. I know people are talking to them about that. So you get your water quality conditions. We also do some good analyses, so we can do dry versus wet. The difference between wet weather and dry weather is night and day. Also beach type, open ocean beaches with no pollution source. Guess what? They always get A's in dry weather. I'm sure that's a big surprise to anyone in this room. Versus those beaches that are next to flowing storm drains or creeks and rivers don't do nearly as well. Or in areas with very, very poor enclosed beaches with poor water circulation don't do as well. The data trends can be used for advocacy. And as I told you, they're also used in the regulatory arena, and that's been a big surprise in that regard. We also provide sewage spill information in real time. As soon as we hear about sewage spill, it gets up there within minutes. And then I think this is one of the coolest aspects of this. One of our local state senators, good friend Fran Pavley, who you guys probably have studied AB 32 in California on climate change. So that's the big climate, she's the author of the big climate change bill for California. We also wrote with her the Clean Beach Initiative, and that has allocated over $100 million to clean up California's most polluted beaches. And the number one tool that we use to decide what project should be at what beach is the beach report card, because it's simple, everybody gets it, and it's really had a big impact. And the end result is a lot of these projects have moved forward. F beaches are now A beaches during the summer, so it shows that it does work. And it's kind of cool to be able to look at the report card and say, hey, this beach went from an F to an A. All right, I think we pretty much covered that. All right, so this shows you one of the other stunts that we did. Did the speech get an A or an F? Sort of another provocative way of getting the word out. Can you guys figure out what that is?
Airplane.
Right, it's an airplane banner. So we did that one day, and I thought people would be really upset.
Must have been flying really low, because that's some small lettering on the bottom.
Yeah, really. But anyway, so we've used that tool as well. So it's pretty well known. It's actually locally, it's already in the jargon. People just because it's been around for so long, you'll see real estate, people advertising. You know, they'll say, "Oh, great schools, our beach got an A." You know, I mean, it's pretty funny that it's crept in there at this point. So another thing we've done on this, these were posted on the lifeguard stands to try to get people to start texting to see whether or not this beach got what the grade they got on the report card. So you could just text 23907 and find out whether your beach got an A or an F. So it's kind of cool that you're at the beach and find that out. And if you don't recognize that style, that was the 1940s California, come out to California and live here and buy oranges and do that sort of thing style that you saw in the postcards. All right, so this is Day Without a Bag. We already talked about. This is Green Santa. And so again, the media ate that up pretty well. You can't see he's wearing baggies on top of that as well. So on pitching the press, in selling these sorts of stories, unfortunately, and again, this goes back to... Yeah, thank you, but I don't think there was more than one other person on our staff that knew that was all the president's men. So that dated me in a hurry. So anyways, so there you go. Redford and Hoffman 30 years ago. But anyways, finding a hero, selling a story, especially now, it's so different. I can't express to you guys that the change in print journalism is so dramatic today versus how it was 3 to 5 years ago. And when I first started, Los Angeles, we had like 3 major papers in town. Now we have a half a paper in town. The LA Times is literally a shell of what it used to be. The people are the environmental journalists before they used to win Pulitzers for their journalism. If you saw the Altered Oceans series that Ken Weiss put together a few years ago, just incredible. Now the people they have working on this environmental stuff, they don't know anything. I mean, right now they have this reporter who works on. She was basically doing the body count stuff on the police report, and now she's doing the environmental, running about once through cooling policy in the state of California, and we're all going nuts because she doesn't understand it. So this sort of stuff sounds really rudimentary. It's more important now than it's ever been before, which is you need a hero and a villain. And I know we're exaggerating here. Who's getting paid for what's the incentive to be on one side of the policy versus the other? Are things as bad now as they were 10, 20 years ago? Are we getting better? Most importantly, and that's the exclamation points, and this is really, I think, where environmental groups often blow it, is what are the solutions? I mean, is it just, woe is me, the world's coming to an end? No, of course not. You have to give reason for optimism. You have to give alternatives that people can follow to really make a difference. All right, so this was the Amundsen Ranch story, a little humorous approach at what I was telling you before. Washington Mutual's theory of evolution. This should fall on the nerd crowd, but it didn't. So I'm really disappointed. So it's how endangered species will adapt to Amundsen Ranch, if you haven't figured it out. This was an isolated population of red-legged frogs that was living in Amundsen Ranch. And what's interesting is there literally is not another population of red-legged frogs, which is an endangered species, within 50 miles of there. And so they had this one small area completely isolated. And they were going to just turn it into golf courses, 2,900 acres. There was going to be about 10,000 people that were going to live in that area. Just destruction of the Malibu Creek headwaters. I think the loss was around 20 linear miles of aquatic habitat. And so here was Washington Mutual's Amundsen Ranch. On the other side, this was owned by Washington Mutual, which is now a defunct bank. And guess who they retained right after the Clinton administration? No, that's Pepperdine. It's going to be something more disturbing. Bruce Babbitt. So it was, as you can imagine, one of my heroes is up against me in our organization on a particular issue. It was quite a surprise to see Bruce Babbitt representing the development interests of that.
I think does everyone know who Bruce Babbitt is? Some of you guys do.
Yeah, Secretary of Interior under Clinton, and a person who was very, very successful as Secretary of Interior and really did some incredible things for protection of special areas, habitat protection throughout the United States. So this is what it is. It's oak woodland. It's riparian habitat, 2,800 acres, 3,000 residents, 2 schools, 300-room hotel, et cetera, et cetera. So it was huge. 2 golf courses. And so impacts to 5 endangered species. One of the things that was there that was interesting was there was the San Fernando Valley spine flower that everyone had thought it was extinct for the last 50 years, and they found it on the site. So that was interesting. Even with it's not like those were discovered when we got involved. They got discovered long before we got involved, and they still got all their approvals to move forward with the development. And so you can see a lot of impacts, environmental impacts, to deal with this. And so despite that, because of the high-powered support that they had, we had to take a completely different tact to win on a campaign with these folks. And our partners were very unusual. And in the interest of time, I won't go into too much detail about the campaign strategy here. But this was a case where the National Environmental Policy Act, it was basically the EIS was approved. So everything was already approved. The environmental impact report was already approved. There was a subsequent environmental impact report. There was some stuff related to Section 404 permitting of dredge and filling of aquatic habitat under the Clean Water Act. 401 certification issues, which is the state certification of that. So there were those things that were, but basically they had 95% of this done. And the local Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy had already signed off on the deal, and so it was really pretty much of a lost cause. And so what happened was that, your question? What happened was that the president of HBO at that time, as well as somebody you might recognize, Rob Reiner, he came and wanted us to get involved on this particular issue. We were already doing volunteer monitoring within the Malibu Creek watershed and had been for the previous 5+ years. Everything from water quality monitoring to macroinvertebrate assemblages and those sorts of things. So we definitely wanted to get involved. It seemed like such a lost cause. We talked each other into saying it wasn't such a lost cause. And so with sort of the Hollywood side of things, the environmental group side of things, we got the Natural Resources Defense Council on our side as well. So that was getting us the legal side of things. We did a whole bunch of things that ranged, even culminated in going to the annual shareholders meeting in Seattle for Washington Mutual and talking to shareholders, where the celebrities were going up to shareholders and saying, did you know that Washington Mutual is destroying the headwaters of the Malibu Creek watershed? Getting Native American, the Chumash tribe, to weigh in on why this particular area was so special to that tribe was another critical component. So you add that all up with the water quality, the natural resources, and all of these various different things, and it really started to resonate with at least some agencies that can make a difference. So this is the Malibu Creek watershed. It's about 110 square miles, and this is Amundsen Ranch up in there. Here's some examples of endangered species. It's one of the southernmost runs of the anadromous steelhead trout. You have the tidewater goby in the Malibu Lagoon, which is at the terminus of Malibu Creek in the brackish water lagoon. The red-legged frog and the San Fernando Valley spineflower. So the end result, just to conclude on that, was that with we had some park bond dollars. The state of California had passed a number of one major water bond, Proposition 12, and that was Proposition 13, and one major park bond, Proposition 12. And the end result was we were able to negotiate sort of a backroom deal to get the banks, the bank Washington Mutual, to sell the property to the state of California. So it's not like, we won and they lost. It's we won and the rich got richer, although then they went bankrupt. So I don't know how much richer they got. But the end result was that the 2,900 acres were purchased for $150 million. And so this whole campaign was to generate a willing seller. And that's exactly, so Washington Mutual is supposed to be in the business of banking, not in the business of development and habitat destruction. And so it took us a while, a good year to 2-year campaign. We got the Regional Water Board on our side. We did not get Army Corps of Engineers on our side, but it was enough to make them a willing seller. And all the local public officials and state public officials, and even some of the federal, Brad Sherman, ended up coming out against the development along the way. All right, so working with reporters, credible. A lot of times you might be tempted to go for the quick quote, which sounds really good, but if it's not a credible quote, it's going to be your last quote. So it's really important that you do that. Being accessible is important. One of the things that's not here is that one of the things that's very tempting when you talk to a reporter is to give them all the background in the world on a specific issue. If you do that, I guarantee you it's a 100% chance that you will be misquoted, and whatever's written is not what you want to hear. And so it's kind of this tough balance between when you talk to the reporters, you really want to keep it to maybe your top 3 things that you really wouldn't mind seeing in the paper or seeing on TV or in the radio, and just live with the fact that the reporter is really ignorant or is pretending to be ignorant to get you to say something that you don't want to say. And that's something that I have trouble trying to train that with my own staff on trying to do. And I still, to this day, fall prey to that issue where it's our nature, right? We want to give them as much information as possible. And I'm telling you right now, that will come back to haunt you. You really want to focus on your top 3 or 4 things at the most. Right? qPCR, how much does that work, right? You're going to explain that to them? No. All right, so this was an interesting example. Where Compton Creek, we were in an issue. It was on dredge and fill permitting at our local Regional Water Quality Control Board. The Army Corps of Engineers, actually this had given them, the LA County Flood Control District, permission to have that, but there was a 401 certification determination by our Regional Water Board. And so in this particular circumstance, you had LA County claim that they were no longer using heavy machinery to do vegetation removal in the creeks. In our region, everything that's a creek that's got any concrete siding to it is considered a storm drain from the eyes of the flood control district. And so whatever habitat value that might be in there in soft bottom, they don't really care, because to them it's all about, are they meeting FEMA, are they not meeting FEMA requirements? And so this gets to be a difficult issue, because nobody's saying that you shouldn't provide flood control, but at the same time, there's got to be a better way to remove vegetation and endangered leaf-belled vireos, for example, than using heavy machinery to get that done. And so what was interesting in this particular circumstance was that James Alamillo, a staff member of ours, invited a reporter out to see Compton Creek to see what happens. In a total coincidence, it was the same day, and this is after the county had told the reporter that they didn't do this. The same day that James went out there with the reporter, there were 4 bulldozers in the creek just taking out all the vegetation. So all of a sudden there was a huge amount of pressure on the county. Basically they were caught in a pretty major lie And at the Regional Water Quality Control Board, at least they got a permit that required some minor requirements for them to, on how to do their dredge and filling that was a lot better than before. But again, that effort of bringing the reporter out really made a big difference. For modern audiences, you get information overload. That, so there's so many different information choices to have. News obviously travels quickly, and then people want to be able to interact with the news. Before it was just read the news and that was enough. Now they want to be able to respond to it and say, I hate your story, I love your story, here's what you missed in your story, and have that interaction opportunity. And decisions are made much more quickly, unless there's a big bureaucracy, but in a lot of cases than they were before. So things have changed a lot. And so, again, that's why we have things like Twitter and the like. So this would be, let's see.
This is Twitter.
Okay, so yeah, so this is the Twitter examples, and so this would be a baby swell shark that's just hatched today and not an exhibit yet. And so people are responding to that. And then, like I said, we do about a dozen of these a day. The campaign-based stuff doesn't work as well when it comes to Twitter, but it works really, really well on Facebook and the like. And so we're moving much more in that direction successfully. Let's see if it's the next one. All right, so our Facebook cause, we have more than 7,500 members. This is all within the last 3 years, so it's really built up quite a bit. And so, like I said, we really saw the benefits of that during the Marine Protected Area campaign and getting people out. We would get 100, 200, 300 people out for all these various different public meetings. This is my blog, Spouting Off. I did not want to blog. This was not something I was like, yeah, I just need more work and really want to do it. But with what was happening to the media, where investigative journalism was practically dying, and a lot of the more technical stories were just not getting covered, I decided to do it. I was talking to it by the communications director for us. I gave it sort of my own spin to it, so it's very sarcastic and the like. But what I found is, it's not that you get a huge number of followers, or I get a lot of people do with their blogs, get a huge number of followers. But what I find is that if there's something that I'm writing about that nobody else has written about, that usually it'll generate other stories. And whether that's a print story or a TV story or a radio story, it's a lot more effective than any of us really thought it would be. So just the fact that you're writing about it as a blog as opposed to a news release. A news release automatically goes into a recycle bin. Everybody's like, oh God, I don't even want to look at it. But if it's a blog, and then what happens is once you start developing some credibility as a blogger, then other blogs that people actually follow much more regularly start linking to them, and then all of a sudden you end up getting a lot of print stories that end up coming out of that. And we had an interesting phenomenon happen, and I think that it might be the next slide. It's really disgusting, so I'm warning you this ahead of time. Where you might have heard about this story. It was pretty shocking. About a mile from our house, there was a local sushi place at Santa Monica Airport called The Hump. And shockingly, the same people who did The Cove, and who here saw The Cove?
Got the Oscar for documentary.
Best documentary. It was a great film. And anyways, the same guys who did The Cove did a sting on this restaurant, The Hump, which hits home to me for a number of reasons. One, like I said, it's a mile from my house. Number two, my brother is one of the most well-respected, famous food critics in the entire country, and so that's also there's food wars that go between us, and that he eats everything I'm trying to save. Is pretty much the rule of thumb. and so here we had in our backyard The Hump, and these guys who did The Cove did a sting on owners of the Hump, and they ordered whale sashimi, and they got it. And the whale sashimi was actually sei whale, which is highly endangered. So it's not like they got minke whale, which is like, Japan says we need to study whales, we're going to catch minke whales. No, they got freaking sei whale, of which, is the third largest whale, baleen whale on the face of the planet, and very highly endangered. And they served it. and people were upset. So the people who did the code were genius in that what they did was they leaked it directly to the New York Times. So here we are, this is how bad the Los Angeles Times has gotten. Los Angeles Times didn't even cover this until 2 or 3 days after the story broke. Because they were like, well, if the New York Times is covering it, like hell, we're going to cover it. But instead, when the New York Times broke it, it went crazy. And really almost as a global story that how could this happen in the United States, let alone in Santa Monica, which is one of the greenest cities in America. So I went to city council that night. They had a city council meeting when the story broke. And I said, look, this restaurant is on city property. And so you guys can revoke their lease because they basically have broken the law. And, pick a law. Do you want CITES? Do you want Endangered Species Act? Do you want Marine Mammal Protection Act? There's no shortage of laws that they broke. And so not only that, but also their business license also could have been revoked. So I blogged on that. So that's the say it ain't so. And the end result was that I think we had more visitors on the blog that night than any other blog that I've ever written because the story was just so hot. Nobody could believe that could ever happen in the United States, let alone Santa Monica. So just interesting. And the end result, and this is the disgusting part, so I'll go through it quickly, is that it was a whale of a story. And the sushi bar ended up, it didn't even get, so the enforcement from the U.S. Attorney's Office was occurring with the sting. Forget about the enforcement. These guys, because the public pressure was so bad on them, that people started picketing them, and Sea Shepherd was out there, and all this other sort of stuff, they closed within a week of the story breaking. So it's interesting, the power of the media in this particular circumstance. There actually is an environmental crime out there that is so heinous that people will cause pressure to cause a major restaurant that had been around for quite some time to close. And not only did it close, it's not like the guy who owned it, it's not like he was bitter. He offered this huge public apology in letting people know that it was a huge mistake and that he's going to pay the fine from the federal government and he's going to try to get the fine to all go to whale conservation groups, which is, to have it go to a Sea Shepherd or something like that. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I'm not saying Sea Shepherd's the right group. They picked one a little less confrontational, perhaps. But it was pretty interesting in that that's how the whole thing resulted. So that was an example where a blog was part of the story and really did lead to the whole action that ended up taking place in that regard. So I had to not end on that note. So there's your obligatory happy child in the ocean. It must be an A beach. But with that, if you guys have any questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain them. Thank you. Yeah.
That story in about the 24-hour window came to us on primetime news, television news. Did they get it from New York Times?
The New York Times broke the story. Everybody got it from there. So CNN was the first network that broke that the restaurant was closed.
Yeah, that's right. I saw that on a crawler.
Right, yeah, they did that crawler, if you remember, for 2 days, which is very unlike them to do that for a story. So it really was a big story. Yeah. In the back.
Two-part question. You said there's 20 to 30 monitoring agencies in the state that feed you the information weekly. Is that done electronically? And then you said there are 400 beaches. All of those are monitored every week.
So, yes, there's 20 to 30 agencies. Most of the combination of health departments and, like I said, NPDES permit, so dischargers, basically. And not every beach is monitored weekly. What we call the AB 411 time period from April 1st to October 31st, they're monitored weekly, and there's about between 450 and 500 beaches that are monitored weekly. During the winter months, people actually swim and surf. I know it's crazy, right? About 365 days a year in California. And there's probably about 250 to 300 beaches that are monitored on at least a weekly basis during the winter months. So that's the breakdown.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You said you've seen some beaches go from the F to the A. Are you seeing any going the other way, from the A to the F?
You know, I'm very happy to say no, we're not. I think getting all this information into the light of day has really made a huge difference. And so you might have a periodic small period where a beach that normally doesn't get poor grades starts getting poor grades, and that'll lead to a sanitary survey to try to do source tracking and find out what the source of it. I know they don't always work. Believe me, I can talk to you about 2 hours on source tracking as well. But at least that sort of action does indeed occur, and there's more focus. We've also seen, this is the thing that upsets me the most, we've seen folks now game the system on monitoring, and this is what's, I think, really fascinating. So perhaps our most notorious beach in the entire state of California is Imperial Beach near the Tijuana River, right on the border with Mexico. And so what's happened there is that Scripps set together a CODAR-based model based on oceanographic conditions on which way the currents are flowing. That if the currents are going south to north and there's flow coming out of the Tijuana River, then they'll automatically notify the health department. The health department will close the beach. That's good, right? For risk management purposes, sounds really good. The other thing is if there's a sewage discharge, of which there are many in Tijuana, into the Tijuana River, boom, they'll close the beach. Again, good for risk management, right? Guess what they don't do? They don't monitor. So guess what happens to our report card? It gets A's. And so now we're, right, because if there's no data to feed into it, so you have a beach closed, you have the loss of the beneficial use of recreational water contact, and so they end up getting, so we're going to have to change that for this report card, because we've done that for 3 years and heard about it from the local group called Wild Coast, as well as Surfrider Foundation down there, basically saying, what are you doing? And we're saying, yeah, look, we understand they lead the state in beach closures, sewage spills, all these other sorts of things. But the way our report card's set up, it's based on the actual data. And so now we're basically saying, look, if you're closing the beach for that week, it gets an F for that week. And so we're making that change in the next few weeks. Yeah.
So following on that, has your algorithm changed in other ways too? Are you changing weightings based on what we know about how pollutants and discharges? We're learning more about oceanography and climate. Have you altered
and epidemiology work as well. Yes, we've changed this probably 3 or 4 times. The last time we went through this grueling process because we wanted to make sure that the state was okay with the changes. And so we did that. One of the things, though, now that we're expanding to other states, they're not monitoring for total fecal and enteral. They're only monitoring for enteral. And so what we've done is created a much simpler algorithm based on enterococcus densities. I don't like it as much. I feel like each indicator tells you a little bit something different about what's going on in the water. And I know enteral is the best of the 3, but I still think they tell us stuff. And that's something that does indeed concern me a little. But we also look at when did the exceedance occur. So if it occurred there's a 30-day rolling average component of it with geometric mean. There's also what occurred within the last week is weighted more highly than something that occurred 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. And then the magnitude of exceedance is something that we did. There was something, I can't remember Rachel was involved in, but her former employer was involved in, which was interlab calibration study. And so we used the results of that interlab calibration study to apply to the report card as well, so that that sort of variability in densities changes the grades as well. Yeah.
I was wondering what kind of future you see with citizen participation, whether it's in the report card or just generally monitoring of any kind of activities or spills or things where you were talking about this two-way communication with Twitter, maybe a future iPhone app. What do you hope to see, or what do you envision as maybe getting the public even more involved in the actual
it's
data
interesting.
collection?
We've mostly been looking at that for communication purposes and to develop a dialogue. But in that regard, our volunteer monitoring efforts, like I said, the Malibu Creek watershed, we do. We have about 18 different sites that we monitor on at least a monthly basis, and it's for nutrients, fecal bacteria, dissolved oxygen. We do macroinvertebrates once a year, but that's just that issue. One of the things that we're going to start within the year is a stream watch program, where I think what you're talking about is going to become a much bigger deal, where in order to promote stewardship within the watershed, we're going to do training of volunteers within the watershed to basically say, okay, you adopt this stretch, and usually it's like if you adopt a stretch, it's like you're going to clean it up or restore it or whatever. We don't want that. What we want instead is to look at those areas that we've identified. We've done GIS something like 70 linear miles of creek within that watershed. So we know where all the various different pipes are and pollution sources and the like. We'd like them to take a look at what's coming out of those pipes, take pictures. They can then send the digital photos to us so we can see what's going on within those areas. Especially looking at construction sites. There are wineries within that watershed, so vineyards that are growing grapes, and seeing, hey, what's running off. And these vineyards are crazy. They're like on 25-degree slopes. They're nuts. And so, like, what's running off of those vineyards when we have a rain. And so that stream watch component, I think, is going to be much more valuable in that regard, and they're going to be able to send us the information instantaneously, and then we're going to be able to turn it to the responsible agency to work with them to do an investigation. It might be us going out and grabbing some samples and doing some nutrient and bacteria work or the like, but at least we'll have more eyes and ears within the watershed that we can respond to.
There's an issue, though, of litigation. I mean, will the courts recognize the information coming from the volunteer groups?
It depends on what the information is. And so in this particular circumstance, it's critical that we're providing them the initial information, and then the regulatory agencies are then following up as soon as possible. And that's very critical. But the data that I was talking about from our volunteer monitoring program has been used for 303 delistings within that watershed for sedimentation, invasive species, and macroinvertebrate assemblage. So community benthic community impacts. And as a result, we're getting TMBLs developed by EPA based on our volunteer monitoring data. So yes, not used for litigation, but used for regulation, in which case then you can use it for litigation. So I'm not saying we're a litigation's last resort kind of group, but at the same time, the information is pretty valuable in the regulatory community. Yeah.
Well, first I wanted to tell you that your Trash Your Friends campaign did come here, because I saw it on about 5 different listservs, so
cool.
good job. But also I was wondering, what did I use it?
Did you like it?
I liked it, but I must say I did not do it. I didn't trash anyone. But because it's still continuing, and now I'll try it now that I know how it works. But I'm a student, I'm busy. But I also was wondering what your goal of the plastic bag campaign was, or is. Is it to try to get individual consumers to not use plastic bags? Or are you trying to work with counties or cities to ban plastic bags altogether, like they've done in a few communities?
All right, here's the story. Yes, we're trying to get plastic bags banned, and we'd also like to see polystyrene banned in the state of California. But we've tried it at the local level, and we've tried it at the state level. And here's what happened at the local level that's beyond chilling. And I think I said this to somebody earlier today, but not everybody else in the room. So everybody always thinks about, in the environmental field, litigation being driven by third-party lawsuits from environmental groups. That is so 20th century. Most litigation that we're seeing is now driven by the regulated community suing over environmental laws. And so here's a perfect example that you're not even going to believe. So the city of Manhattan Beach banned plastic bags, and they had a 100-page staff report to do this. And they got sued by a group. Was it an environmental group? No. It was the Coalition to Save the Plastic Bag. And I bet you didn't even know that they were endangered, right? And so there are 19 billion plastic bags that are used in California each and every year. And the lawsuit from the Coalition to Save the Plastic Bag, also known as the American Chemistry Council, as well as the Plastic Bag Manufacturers Association, was over something related to your National Environmental Policy Act. It's our California Environmental Quality Act. So it was a CEQA lawsuit. And what they said was that an environmental impact report had not been completed before the ordinance had come to City Council. So clearly, They didn't look at the environmental impacts of banning plastic bags, because clearly it's negative, right? And so what they were trying to claim, and they found a judge, find a judge anywhere to make a ruling on almost anything, right? To basically say that the climate change impacts of moving from plastic to paper had not been properly assessed before that decision had been made. And before you think that was a once-in-a-lifetime sort of thing, Oakland, a year earlier, as did San Francisco, banned plastic bags, but they allowed bioplastics. Now, bioplastics in the ocean are just as bad as plastics, pretty much, from a relative perspective. It's not like it's 140 degrees in the ocean and, with high bacterial densities, so you're not getting composting conditions in the ocean. So what ended up happening in that lawsuit was, again, California Environmental Quality Act, you didn't do an EIR, clearly bioplastics, you're going to shift from plastics to bioplastics, those environmental impacts weren't properly assessed. So the Oakland ordinance got overturned, the Manhattan Beach ordinance got overturned. So what ended up happening was a whole bunch of cities got together and they pooled their resources and they just finished what's called a Master Environmental Assessment, which will be used by each and every city and county that wants to ban plastic bags. So you're going to end up seeing a whole crazy quilt of various different bans and fees and God knows what else that are going to occur within the next year in all these cities because the Master Environmental Assessment is being completed. And so everyone can do their each individual EIR. I personally, as somebody who deals in the regulatory arena as much as I do in the policy arena, I hate that because it's basically caving in to the plastic bag industry, the American Chemistry Council, in that you're saying you have to do an EIR to take that sort of local government action, which I think is an absolutely chilling result from the standpoint of environmental policy, because that could be a zoning change that you need to do an environmental impact report for, and that's crazy. And so there's this race against time between what's going to happen locally, and then statewide we have Assembly Bill 1998, which is to ban both plastic and paper bags in the state of California. I don't think paper is going to stick. I don't think people are ready for it. But the concept is to move everybody to reusable bags rather than using single-use bags. And so that's what's going on in California. But this trend of the regulated community suing over laws that they do not like, using the very environmental laws that were written to protect the environment, is not a new trend. It's been going on in California now for over a decade. On Clean Water Act action, there's been the Coalition for Practical Regulation, which is a bunch of cities that are against all Clean Water Act laws. And every time there's a total maximum daily load or a stormwater permit, they sue over it. So it's a big trend that's been happening in the last few years. Anything else? Oh.
I heard that Shimano has created a anti-MPA action group, and it's funding it and using NRA as their model of being able to take action against the NPAs. Have you heard that Shimano's involvement? I mean, they're a big company.
I haven't heard of Shimano, but I'm trying to remember. There was another fishing gear company that I thought I had here, and I'm blanking out on it. The fishing community. What was interesting about the MPA discussion is that not only did you have private industry funding the fishing industry, you also had the Packard Foundation and the Moore Foundation through the Resource Legacy Funded Foundation. They funded everybody. So basically everybody was funded to fight each other on MPAs, which is highly unusual. Usually no one's funded to fight each other. And so that was done so that there wouldn't be as much bias. So I don't know, I didn't feel like they were, I can tell you from a community organizing perspective on who got the most people out and who got the most people excited and who won the battle of the blogosphere. Yeah, the fishing community, I'd say, kicked the environmental community's butt. There's no doubt about it. I think, again, the big thing that I was disappointed in but not surprised was that the scientific community that put together the scientific guidelines did not fight for the guidelines that were being ignored. And they still have a chance to, but with the Blue Ribbon Task Force as well as the Fish and Game Commission. So they're all upset privately, but nobody's upset publicly, even though they dedicated 18 months of their life to come up with these guidelines, and they're largely being ignored. Yeah.
And just the addendum to that story is it was the environmental director of Shimano blogged that the proposed national ocean policy by the Obama administration was going to prevent recreational fishing in all public waters, and Fox News picked this up as if it were news. And then they talked about this. Can you believe that the Obama administration is going to do this?
Yeah.
And everyone, they talked about it, and they got called out on it. And so this guy was a blogger for ESPN Outdoors. He's not anymore because he didn't keep it credible. And
I don't think credibility in the news was
Yes,
all that common
an issue.
anymore. So, I
just want to ask you one more question so we can get you to dinner.
And you guys can get to your pregame warm-up.
Yeah, oh, that's right. What do you guys do about the intellectual property rights with these things? Do you say, no, we created Bag Monster, or we did grades? Do you worry about
You
that?
pick your battles. For Beach Report Card, we definitely had trademarked that, but Heal the Bay's trademark. But for something like the Bag Monster, no. Yeah. I mean, because honestly, it's not a lot of money, but it's like $1,000 a pop, and it adds up after a while. So we did do it for a couple of things, but nothing.
Well, that was great. I want to mention before we close that about, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, the New York Times had an op-ed that said California is doing for water quality what it did for air quality 30 years before. And a lot of that's because of Heal the Bay. And I think, what is it now in the summertime? 95% of all beaches score an A or B?
Yeah, about 90 to 95% open ocean beaches. Open ocean is almost 98.
Yeah, and that is such a dramatic difference from 20 years ago. If you've seen Dogtown and Z-Boys, Santa Monica used to look like 30, 40 years ago. It's really incredible. So it works, and people make the right decisions if you give them the right information.
And if you do interlock calibrations.
So thanks, Mike.